This is November the 3rd, 2021. We are recording here the Parsha Toldot. Just to put it into a different perspective, Toldot is now at the transition to the life of Yaakov, the life of Yaakov, it's really the story of Isaac. Ela Toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham. Avraham olidet Yitzchak. I literally could spend a whole class on that verse alone. Uh, it's the story of Isaac, but it really is not much of a story of Isaac. It's going to be the story of Isaac as the father of Esau and Yaakov, and then we will move into these two people, Esau and Yaakov. As usual, I got um, focused on what's at the beginning of the parsha, the birth of the two twins, and specifically a set of puzzles that emerges from the character of Esau. And so I'm going to focus today on Esau, with a sense of also focusing on the backstory and trying to create the backstory, which is, I think, a theme that has emerged in these last few classes, trying to populate the world and try to imagine the world through the eyes of the characters, based on very little information that the Torah presents to us, although the Torah presents to us information that demands that we look at this and we examine this information and ask these questions. So the method of reading the Torah is that you're always asking, well, why does it say this and not this? Why does it say it this way and not this way? And what could the Torah have said instead? How could it have shaped the story? And interpretation comes in when we try and answer these questions. I think we in interpreting and answering these questions, we try to give a compelling set of reasons and logical statements to make these interpretations hold. Of course, uh, it also invites different interpretations, and that's where we get the conversation and the debate. And that's what makes the study of the Torah fun. It's not when we agree with each other, it's when we disagree with each other. I seem to like that a lot. So, because it certainly makes it enjoyable, interesting, and it also makes it fun. And most importantly, it offers the potential for learning things that are new from new perspectives. So that is a way of saying what I'm going to try and present here, I haven't seen anywhere else. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist anywhere else, but it also means that it could be really way, way wrong. It could be off, but that's the fun of it. Okay. So with no further ado, I'm going to bring up the text here. And the text is, I'm going to do the text first in Hebrew, then in English. Then I'm going to do the text very closely. Okay, there we go. The text, Chrome, Google. All right, so I'm just going to put myself in the spotlight. And here we go. Can everybody see clearly? Make it as big as possible. I'm going to read the Hebrew and then the English. Ve'ela Toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham. Avraham holidet Yitzchak. Vayihi Yitzchak ben 40 shana. Bekachto et Rivka bat Betuel ha'arami mipadan Aram achot Lavan ha'arami lo liisha. I'm going to skip down to the English now. This is the story of Isaac, son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took to wife Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, sister of Lavan the Aramean. I'll continue in English and then we'll go back. Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. And the Lord responded to his plea, and his wife Rebekah conceived. But the children struggled in her womb, and she said, "If so, why do I exist?" She went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord answered her, "Two nations are in your womb, two separate peoples shall issue from your body. One people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger," and we'll talk about that in a second. When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first one emerged red like a hairy mantle all over, so they named him Esau. Then his brother emerged, holding on to the heel of Esau, so they named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when they were born. When the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the outdoors, but Jacob was a mild man who stayed in camp. Isaac favored Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah favored Jacob. And I'm going to stop there because the next few verses is the story of the stew and the cheating of Esau out of the birthright, which is beyond what I want to talk about right now. I'm really trying to answer the questions or ask the questions of what's the world that they emerge into, and how can I populate it, and what kinds of things do I know given this information here, this little information. I almost, I see Carol Metz here, and I always think of Bob because Bob is a geologist, and you get little evidence. You look at rocks, and you have to ask. You get a whole story from a rock, and I think studying a text is almost like geology. That's why I have an affinity to that, which is like I look at the text and I'm going like, there's no evidence here. You're giving me no details. I want to know the whole story. And so, what we all have to do in this is really put this under the microscope and ask a few questions. So the first question is, or not the first question is, but we know that they're older parents. Isaac is 40 when he takes to wife Rebekah. We don't know how old Rebekah is. The Midrash says that she was 3, which is kind of ridiculous. Let's assume that she's a younger woman, okay? Certainly in the story of Rebekah at the well, she's not a 3-year-old girl. The reason why they say that she's a 3-year-old girl has to do with computations of ages that are slightly far-fetched. But certainly she's at least a young adult. She's got some character because when she was asked whether or not she wants to go to the land of Canaan to marry this man, she says, "Elech, I will go." And when we see her, when they finally meet, she is on the camel. She falls off her camel. She asks the servant who this is. "This is my master." She covers herself. So we have some insight into a very, very fascinating, strong, determined, forthright character, Rebekah. So we know then, I'm going to stop to share for a second and spotlight myself. So we have some information here. We know about Isaac. We know about his father. We actually know all the generations back to Terach and to even all the way back to Shem. We know that Abraham was the 10th generation when you count from Shem, Shem being generation 1. In that line, it's Shem, Arpachshad, Shelach, Ever, Peleg, Reu, Srug, Nachor, Terach, Abraham. So Abraham is 10 from Shem. And we know that Rebekah is the daughter of Bethuel, who is the daughter of Nahor. So we know then that Isaac and Rebekah are first cousins once removed. I would chart this out for you, but put it in your heads. This is Abraham has a brother, Nahor. Nahor has a son, Bethuel. Bethuel has a daughter, Rebekah. So Abraham and Nahor are brothers. So Abraham is Rebekah's uncle, and Abraham is Bethuel's uncle. Bethuel's uncle. Abraham would be Rebekah's great uncle. Isaac and Bethuel are cousins, are first cousins, meaning Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel,
once cousin, once removed.
First cousin once removed. Okay, so we know then that they are first cousins once removed, and that they have their lineage in the Shem line of the Noach children. Okay, all right. We also know that Isaac is 40. That's a little older than the average person having children. They're having children in their 20s and 30s. That's biblical already, past the flood. We know that Abraham was an outlier in that department as well, having had children when he was both 86 and 100, and a whole slew of them when he was 140. Okay. And we know, of course, a little bit about Isaac's backstory, that Isaac is somewhat traumatized by the sacrifice. He is without his mother. His father's still alive at the beginning of the story, because we'll know that his father lives to 175. So his own father at this point, when he marries Rebekah, Abraham is 140. Abraham is 100 when Isaac is born. Isaac is 40 when he marries Rebekah. So Abraham is 140 years old when Isaac marries Rebekah. And we know that 20 years will go by before the birth of Esau and Jacob. Isaac is 60. That's the text says that Isaac is 60. And if Isaac is 60, Abraham is 160. And so Esau and Jacob are born within the lifetime of their grandfather. Their grandfather dies at the age of 175. And so the boys are 15 years old when their grandfather dies. So we have a world here in which there is items, but we don't know of the relationship of Isaac and Abraham in this story. It seems that Abraham and Isaac are estranged. There's no conversation between the two of them. We know that when Abraham dies, as is recorded in last week's Parsha, Isaac buries Abraham together with Ishmael. We don't know what Isaac's relationship with Ishmael is, but these people are populating the world here, and all of these are really unknown questions, unknown pieces of information for us. Okay. Any comments, questions, or observations until now? Wait another beat. Go ahead, Marley.
Why do you assume that Isaac and Abraham didn't have a good relationship?
Among the things that, the possibilities of this relationship is that they did not have a relationship. And I'm basing that on the fact that the Torah really tells us nothing. So you could easily conjecture, well, just because the Torah doesn't tell us anything doesn't mean that they didn't have a relationship.
But he cared enough about his son to ask Eliezer, or whatever the servant's name is, to go and find a suitable wife. Either that, or he's such a numbskull that he can't choose a wife for himself, and so I'm going to get one for him.
Well, how would you feel if you were a 40-year-old man and you weren't married, and your father didn't want you to marry any local women, and had to dispatch his trusted servant in order to do that for you? You would feel pretty lousy, pretty helpless, pretty incapable of doing anything. Um, that, in addition to the fact that you were bereaved of your mother, and that your father tried to sacrifice you, uh, adds to a picture, a portrait. I admit that it's an interpretation here, because we could offer a plausible counter interpretation that there wasn't much of a relationship here. They don't live near each other. They don't really. There's no record of any kind of communication. Now, the counter interpretation would be, well, they got together every Shabbos. The Torah doesn't tell us that.
But if he could have sent Isaac to find his own wife, but then following the advice that if the son goes to find a wife, he's going to settle over there, as opposed to coming back and taking care of his aged father. So he doesn't want to send his son away to live where Abraham came from.
Right. And so all of that, I think, underscores a certain kind of suspicion or judgment, a prejudgment on on Isaac, that Isaac is really not capable, or that Isaac would have been absorbed into that family, precisely because at this point, still in the story, Abraham, there's no family, and I'm assuming, I'm making a few assumptions. I'm assuming that Abraham is smart enough to see the patterns of the world, as most of us would, right? We all live within family structures, and we see the way people align themselves in terms of their family allegiances. I mean, in our case, it has to do with, where do you spend Pesach? Where do you go for the Seder? I see Ellie's hand and I see Bonnie's hand. Go ahead, Ellie. Go ahead.
I have the feeling up until this point that Isaac is really a Nebush. He's a Nebush. And then I think ahead, because I have read what's happening next week and the week after, that he never really comes out as anything more than this Nebushy character. When he does something, it's because his wife pushes him in that direction. Rebecca keeps moving the story. Rebecca moves the story, not Isaac. So
yes,
one of our fathers, because he belongs to this important family. That's his role, to be the carrier of the family name.
Okay, so I agree with you. I think there's something, he's diminished, certainly compared to the colossal characters of his father and his son, Jacob. And it's not an accident. The middle character in this line is always the one that's going to be kind of overshadowed by the father and the son. But he does have his own moment. It's a very limited moment, and that does happen in this parsha, where he becomes a great person in his own right. God blesses him. He is able to amass quite a fortune. He plants and he has flocks, etc. So there is something substantial about him, notwithstanding the fact that he is quite passive, as you, I think, correctly state. He's passive in the course of his life. He's passive with regard to his wife, for the most part, and certainly later on, he becomes blind. He's blind not only to physically, but obviously in a spiritual sense as well. I would also give Isaac a point for the when his when they are experiencing their infertility problems for 20 years. He does take matters into his own hands, and he turns to God. He entreats God. Vayatar. He beseeches God. So, as someone remarked, it's unusual in all of the cases of barrenness, akirut, when a woman is barren, the women themselves do make a statement. We have Sarah, we have Rachel, we have Hannah. These are the great, female figures in the Bible who are all barren. And there are others too, and they all beseech God. Rebecca is the only one that Isaac beseeches on her behalf. Um, and when that happens, Vatelech lidrosh et Adonai, she herself goes and tries to seek God herself. Bonnie, you have then and Barbara, go ahead.
You said that Isaac was estranged from his father, but truthfully, he's respectful of his father by marrying the Rebecca, who his father has chosen for him. And I think that should be taken into consideration.
So let us indeed take that into consideration. That when the woman Rebecca is presented to him, look, Abraham is not there. It doesn't say they made a big feast and they had Sheva brachas and they invited the whole town. When Isaac is born, the weaning feast for Isaac is something that is like it's a bar mitzvah. We would equate that with a bar mitzvah today, where it's Abraham is trying to really establish himself in that area, and he has a big vayas mishteh gadol. He does a big feast. It's a big moment for him. I suspect when Isaac is weaned as a child, Abraham, it's not only that he's weaning him or that he's weaned, there is a sense that he is dissociating her, detaching him, from his mother. The weaning is to bring Isaac into his orbit rather than to keep him in her orbit. I said that they're estranged because the wedding happens only in maternal terms. He brings her into his mother's tent. He doesn't bring her into his father's tent. It's like, I brought her home and we, we lived in the family home. We lived in the family home and, it was my father's household. No, he moves to his mother's house. Okay.
His mother's not there.
His mother's not
But
there.
his
His mother's
there.
gone.
Yeah.
Okay. And
So
his
there's
mother
an
has an
empty
empty
tent.
household.
There's privacy there. That was a smart decision on his part.
Oh, indeed. Okay, but we can't escape the sense that the marriage to Rebecca, obviously brings him comfort upon the loss of his mother. So there is something that the Bible is implying here in terms of his attachment to his mother as opposed to his father. The fact that he vayinachem Yitzchak achar ima, the fact that he is comforted after the loss of his mother, only suggests that loss was a deep loss, and of course the commentaries elaborate on that. Everything that we're saying is an attempt. It's my attempt and your attempt, everybody's attempt here collectively to try and to populate the world and our imaginations and the story based on the meager information. So taking this point, the marriage, taking that point, the ancestry, taking this point, the ages, taking, another piece of information, namely like the 20 years of barren, childlessness. We're trying to establish, what world these two boys, Jacob and Esau, emerge into. I have said, prior to this in other examinations that I think the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah is probably the best marriage of all the patriarchal unions. And I'm prepared to kind of be convinced otherwise, based on if I focus on other pieces of information here. He does love her, but they don't really talk to one another. We don't see them talking to each other the way that, let's say, Jacob and Rachel will talk to each other later on. Barbara, you have something.
Stephen,
Steve.
we're unmuted.
We're unmuted?
Yep. I can hear you.
All right, so I think I've expressed this to you before. Abraham is a leader of a huge entourage. So the first thing you got to think of is, okay, later on he's in Hebron. He must have been in Hebron before. So he has two homes. He has Hebron and he has Beersheba. Isaac went home to Be'er Lahai Roi. Right. What's he doing? Well, he's got a brother there. And he likes his brother. He grew up with his brother. Abraham is the one who sent his brother away. So he establishes a home near there. Now, the fact that he had his mother's tent just means that Abraham also had a residence there and has the tent there. So
in Beersheba or in
wherever they are.
Wherever
now.
they are. So okay.
Wherever they are. There's
Yep.
a summer home, and a winter home. So
His pied a terre in Beersheba. Go ahead, Alana.
later on, no, I'm not. gonna-
What was it?
later on,
What kind of, let Steve finish. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
later on, we learn that Isaac also was a great businessman, dug a lot of wells, had a huge entourage of sheep, and this is while his father's still alive. We think,
No.
The Bible is very sparse in what it's telling us. It's telling us what we need to know for the generation of Hebrews.
Okay. So as I said, in addition to all the other pieces of information, we get some information relating to Isaac and his wealth. Ilana, go ahead.
I don't want to repeat what somebody said because I was late a little bit. The relationship between Abraham and Isaac, we shouldn't be surprised that it's not such good relationship because maybe neither of them probably did not recover from the experience of the Akedah. So maybe Abraham still has, guilty feelings, and Yitzhak is still hurting about it. So what do the commentators say about that?
Look, I mean, this is something that we tend to focus on. The commentaries really don't focus on that. We and of course we're bringing a whole psychological perspective to the story. That it's not that they didn't have a psychological perspective, but we're so cultivated by the idea of trauma, post-trauma experiences. The events in childhood that affect you later on, and we know that just by the 150 years of psychology and insight that psychologists have given us. So it's natural that we, who are a psychologized generation, look at these kinds of stories and ask these questions. And it's not I would say my attempt to examine the relationship is also it's a series, a set of questions that is focused on relationship because this is how we've been taught to think about the world. Every generation brings its own set of concerns to their discovery and their interpretation of the text. There is, and we've had these conversations here, about the symbolic representations of Esau and Jacob, or the symbolic meaning of a life of Isaac. You listen to, or I listen to other kinds of Parsha talks in which they talk about Isaac as a deeply spiritual man. The Isaac is associated with the meditation in the field and the depth of his own internal spiritual life is, and that is accorded a certain kind of status. So we all bring a certain valence to our reading here, and I'm trying to ask, but what do we know? And the conjecture is, we make a portrait based on the meager facts that are given here. One of which is that Isaac is 40. One of which is that they have. We're assuming that they have a knowledge of their ancestry, and we're assuming that they know of the relationships that exist, because nobody grows up in a vacuum. And and here again we are certainly projecting something that each of us grows up with onto a whole story. For example, I mean, we each belong to families. Many of us have siblings. And our parents have siblings, and so we grow up depending on how closely we grew up with each other. We know our cousins, we know our second cousins, and we know of events in the past. In many of our cases, it has to do with immigration or cataclysm or the Holocaust or the moving from place to place, which are part of the story, which from a very early age you just know. You don't have to articulate it. You know who you are. You know who the people are, in your life, your grandparents, when they come to visit, how they interact with each other. And you don't have to be sophisticated at all to understand your place within a family structure. I would even say that forget grandparents and cousins and uncles and aunts. Even within a nuclear family, every nuclear family knows, after the birth of their second child, that there is rivalry, there's tension, there are stories that will emerge in that life. That's just an obvious fact. Even with one child, that there's a new story that emerges. Okay, let's go on. I'm going to do some. There we go. Interpretation. Okay. So I want to think about Esau and build the story. So we know the genealogy that Abraham is Isaac. Abraham is Isaac's father. Isaac is 40. They're married to Rebekah. Rebekah and Isaac share a common ancestor, Terach. Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, son of Nachor, son of Terach. Bethuel is Isaac's cousin. Rebekah is the daughter of Isaac's cousin, Isaac's first cousin once removed. Terach is 10th generation from Noah. Abraham is 11th generation from Noah. Isaac is 12th generation from Noah. Jacob and Esau would be the 13th generation from Noah. And that, I think, is significant. Rebekah is barren. Isaac prays on her behalf. God granted his entreaty. Okay. We know it's a difficult pregnancy. Vayitrotzetsu habanim bikirba. Three-word phrase there. Vayitrotzetsu. Vayitrotzetsu is translated in many different ways, but one very interesting translation is they crush each other. Rotzetz. I like to think of it as they are rubbing against each other. Ilana, what would you say, Vitrotzetsu?
Well, the simple explanation is from Larutz. Vitrotzetsu is Larutz, maher, like fast, into each other. Okay,
but that's the root is resh vav tzadi, and this would be resh tzadi tzadi, ratzatz. So I think ratzatz is more like they're grinding. There's a grinding against them,
like breaking.
Exactly.
Almost breaking.
So it's if you could imagine a pregnancy in which twins are breaking up each other all the time. And that is why it's easy to understand. Rebecca says, Im ken lama ze anochi. Right, 3-word phrase, right? Which is, why? Why am I doing it? Why me? Lama ze anochi. Why is this happening to me? Vatelech lidrosh et Adonai, and she goes and she makes inquiry of God. And that itself is very interesting. She has a problem, and we don't know where she goes. We don't know what she does. But she takes that anguish, that physical torment that she is experiencing, and she brings it to God. Okay, and God gives her an oracle. Vayomer Adonai la shnei goyim bivitnech u'shnei leumim mema'ayich iparedu u'leom mil'om yamatz v'rav yavod tza'ir. And I'm saying it deliberately in that cadence. I've been focusing on this year's reading with these 3-word phrases: Shnei goyim bivitnech, 2 nations in womb. Ushnei, this is 4 words. Ushnei lu'amim mime'ach yiparedu. So it doesn't really conform to a 3-word pattern, but it's 2 nations mime'ach yiparedu will go forth from your innards. U'le'om mil'om yamatz, 3-word phrase. Tribe shall be mightier than tribe. The Rav Yavod Tza'ir. And this is complicated. We translate it usually as the elder shall serve the younger. Okay? The Rav Yavod Tza'ir. Okay? But it all depends where you put the comma. Because you can make it the reverse. If the elder shall serve the younger, the Rav Yavod Tza'ir, you can also say the Rav Yavod Tza'ir. The younger will serve the elder. And that is the way that the Torah brilliantly confuses us. It gives us a lot of ambiguity. An oracle is what you hear in the oracle. And so we don't know how she decodes this, but she has the information already from this divine statement to her. God has spoken to her, which itself is extraordinary. And she's carrying that knowledge with her through the rest of her pregnancy. We don't know at what point she experiences the tumult in utero. Okay, could it be? And I'm missing my resident OBGYN here. Okay, but at what point does a fetus start to move? Okay, maybe you can have and some.
If you live in Texas, you got to worry about it. Okay,
so we're talking about 3-4 months. The movement starts at a certain point that we are determining to be earlier than we once thought, I guess. So she is aware of this, and she is aware of this information. So the pregnancy lasts 9 months, 36 weeks. At a certain point, she feels this terrible pain inside, and she has to go for a period of time, an undisclosed period of time, in which she is walking around with this oracular knowledge, a prophetic knowledge that I'm not sure excites her or entices her. I would be concerned. And what the text is doing is trying to draw us into her mind. What would you think if you got an oracle like that? What would you say to yourself if you had a statement to you, someone looked into a tarot card or a crystal ball and said, this is what's going to happen? From people who I've counseled who have had these kinds of experiences, I've only done it once or twice, where someone said as a kind of entertainment, they went to an astrologer or they went to a card player and they were told something, and what they were told deeply worried them. When people say things to you about what you are going to be or what is going to happen to you, never mind astrologers, we have this experience now medically, right? A diagnosis happens, and so a doctor says to you, well, this is what you can expect in the course, in the progress of this, disease, okay? And so that is, depending on how serious the disease is, that can be very, very troubling, right? People are generally very troubled by that kind of information. So I would say that this is not, your children are going to go and win the lottery. This is, your children are going to introduce into their lives conflict, and you are going to experience that as their parent. And that is a huge, huge burden to live with. I did get a note here in the chat. but I can't read it. Okay, this is Bob. Quickly, if you know, typically occur 18-20 week pregnancy. Occasionally, is there? Okay, that's right. So, thank you, Bob, for the science here. Okay, so you can imagine that the remainder of her pregnancy from around week 20 to the end is filled with this sense of foreboding. Okay, my question really is, so we don't know what the conversation is between the two of them. She's walking around with this information. Does she tell Isaac? Does she say, she goes to seek God and she comes home and Isaac says, "Hi, honey, how are you feeling?" And she says, "Oh, you don't ask me. I'm feeling. I can't sleep. It's the worst." And he'll say to her, you went to see God today?" And she says, "Yeah, I went to see God." And so what did he say? None of your business. We don't know. We don't know if they talk, okay? But then, go ahead, Marlene.
But at least she knows that her sons are going to survive. With the death rate at that time, infant mortality, she has a good piece of information.
Well, that would be a consolation. I think that's a nice way to read that, is to say, well, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that you're going to have a successful pregnancy and go to term, and you'll have a fairly, uneventful birth, except for the fact that, it's kind of breech. Is it breech, or what is it when a hand comes out? Okay, but the children are going to survive. The bad news is that they're going to be fighting all their lives. Okay, well, here, verse 24, Kaf Daled, Vayimle'u yameha laledet, 3-word phrase, which means Vayimle'u yameha laledet. I love the wordplay, Male yameha laledet, right? It's lots of consonantal play, mem and lamed, yameha laledet. Okay, so milu'u yameha laledet. She reaches the term, Vine tomin bivitna. Behold, there were, in fact, twins in her uterus, okay, in her stomach. Why is that? I mean, we already know that she had twins, but is it a confirmation? Is it what? We don't know. And now, another 3-word phrase, Vayetze harishon admoni. The first one comes out, ruddy, admoni. We translate admoni as ruddy, but adom, he's reddish, okay? Kulo kaderet se'ar, completely hairy, mantle-like, okay? It's like a big fur ball. Vayikre'u shemo Esau. And they called him Esau. This, I have to say, we never pay attention to this verse other than, the anomaly of the way he appears in the world. He comes out like a big furry ball. And Bob, you got it. There is a term, there is a condition, right, for children who are really hairy. I forget what it's called. Okay, look it up for me. And that may be the condition here. There's a name for the hair on an infant, right? But what is interesting to me here is that in most narratives of birth, certainly up until now, and in the book of Genesis, first of all, who is naming children? It's the mother that names the child, okay? And there you go.
God named Yitzchak?
I'm sorry?
Didn't God name Yitzchak?
So God has named Yitzchak. Abraham and Sarah named them Yitzchak, named him Yitzchak. But later on, it's Leah all the way. Sarah, Rachel, they're all named. Here it's Vayikre'u Shemo Esau, and that it arouses a certain kind of set of questions among commentators, and it ought to arouse our puzzlement. And the puzzle is, who is the they? The they could be Rebecca and Isaac, or is this birth a public event with midwives and other people around? And so, I mean, imagine this kind of moment where the baby emerges, they take the baby out, and there's another baby on the way. So she's still on the birthing stool, okay? And there are people around her, and there's got to be a midwife or a nurse or something who takes the baby. And the first thing that they're doing is that they cut the umbilical cord and they're washing the baby off, which is what they all know how to do. They may rub some kind of ointment. Sometimes they rub salt on babies, whatever. In some primitive cultures, they did that too. And there's more than there are a lot of people around. There are a lot of people around this baby when the baby's born. There's at least two people, the mother and the father. There's got to be a midwife. There's got to be another midwife. There's got to be, a few people helping out, right? And so they name him means, wow, this birth is so unusual that everybody, there's no bris, there's no nothing. It's like at the minute that he's born, it's like, this is a strange appearance. This is strange. Esav is a very, very hard word to pin down in terms of what the etymology is. There is a whole set of etymology that says that Esav from Asa, he is fully formed, okay, and that is the hair. And there's another set of etymology that of being covered, and that is another Semitic language. So both of these are really not conclusive. He is fully covered. The mantle, Esav. It seems I would be inclined to that as the meaning, and that comes. You find something similar in Arabic. Okay, go ahead, Ilana.
The infinitive could be la'asot, to be like he was made this way, the way he came out full of hair and reddish. So Esav, the root could be ein sin hey, and yes. The infinitive la'asot, and yes. he was asui, was made like that.
So that gives rise to the meaning he came out fully made, or there is another set of meanings that has to do with being covered. Okay,
he looked different.
Yes, that would be the bottom line. Is that everybody, the fact I'm more concerned with the plural of Vayikra than I am with the name. The name it's going to remain a puzzle to us, but the fact that it's pretty clear that a lot of people are engaged in his naming. So the question I have is, well, what is the effect of that? Okay, I'll stop sharing for a second. And if your birth elicits a kind of reaction that almost, today we would say it would be akin to being, I don't want to sound crass here, but it's like when the child is born with some kind of deformity, when the child is born unusual, right? And this happens obviously, with children who, born with a cleft mouth or with a limb or with, some kind of, deformity. And so everybody takes note of the child's deformity. This is unusual. The birth of a ruddy, hairy child is an unusual event. Everybody takes note of it. And so this child from day one of his life is in a world in which people say, oh, you're the kid that was hairy, and you stayed hairy, and you're red, and you're reddish. You're the kid, right? And so before he even has any sense of self, right, the only sense of self is otherness, right? And here, this text elicits from me the question, which is a psychological question, is when does a child recognize in this case, himself, that he is other, physically other, okay? And that he doesn't look like every other child. Now, it's not that they go to kindergarten or nursery or whatever, we don't know that, but I suspect that there is an early recognition from this child that this child is different. And that early recognition from the earliest of ages, the age in which the child already has some kind of self-awareness, will last the whole life. In the way that some children and their self-awareness, it lasts their whole life. Okay, I remember, Ellie, you were an educator of young children, right? And you have to unmute yourself because you probably have anecdotal, experience of this, where a child who emerges, early on in the nursery, you kind of know that it's a different child. Yeah.
It's different depending upon the circumstances and depending upon who the people around that child are. If there is somebody in that child's environment who says, "Uh-oh, this one is different," that's a negative. But if nothing is said, or if this is a wonderful child, in spite of the differences, that child's going to grow up happy.
Okay.
There is nothing like validation and love from the people around that child to give that child a wonderful self-image, which will last all of his life.
Okay, so I would say that that's probably a very modern and enlightened way of
And
looking at
optimistic.
children. I suspect that not too long ago, when people saw unusual children or children with unusual propensities, they said things, and those things lasted. I mean,
Yeah.
we are not far removed from societies that put nicknames on individuals that lasted their whole lives and that affected them. There are lots of little anecdotes. One of my favorite anecdotes, it wasn't a child, it was she wasn't like 3 years old, but she was 13 or 14 years old, and it was a shtetl story. It's in a book that called my name was Mayor whatever an artist who paints these naive pictures of shtetl life. He talks about a story of which this young child was playing near the latrine and fell into the ditch, the latrine, and was covered in that refuse. And she emerged and, of course, went home and cried and everything, and they washed her down. Of course, got a nickname. I don't remember the nickname, but you can imagine that this is the girl who fell into the pit for the rest of her life was associated with that event by a nickname, by a horrible nickname, and couldn't find a mate, and couldn't find and whatever, was really, really damaged by an accident like that. And so, in shtetl society, if someone was crippled, they called them crippled Yosef or whatever, that kind of thing. And those names held. So you could imagine that in this primitive society, this boy would have been, and I saw Bob, you put something about othering. This boy would have been othered, okay? And needs an accessible past to latch onto. And that is where I'm going to make my little theory here, okay? My theory is as follows. So Isaac is 60. Isaac has knowledge that he is other. Esau becomes a hunter. This is unusual. It's unusual in this society for someone to become a hunter. Because in this family, everybody's a shepherd. Abraham was a shepherd, my grandfather's a shepherd, even if they're estranged from each other. His father, at the very most, also has a farm, or we know he has sheep, we know he's got possessions, right? And Esau is a hunter. So the question is, why? Why does he become a hunter? And I'm asking, who else in the Bible is a hunter? And I have to go back. There's only one character in the Torah that's a hunter. And that is Nimrod. And here is Nimrod. Nimrod is Uvenei Cham, Kush, Mitzrayim, Ufut, Uchnan, Uvenei Kush, Sva, V'chavila, V'savta V'rama, V'savtecha, Uvenei Rasavadan, V'chush Yaladet Nimrod. So Nimrod comes in the line of Cham, and it's Cham, Kush, Nimrod. He is the third in line, and he is a big deal, Nimrod. Nimrod is a hunter. Nimrod is a hero. Nimrod is a king. Nimrod is a legendary figure. He's in the third generation after Cham. Cham, Kush, Nimrod. So I put here in this line 2 parallel lines. The Shem line, in which Abraham is the 10th in line from Shem, and the Cham line, and I'm basically saying Nimrod is 1, Cush is -1, and Cham is -2. If I start out from Nimrod, guess what? I go 10 generations, and these people are not named, but here they are named. So if there was a parallel, and I know I'm really going out, I'm like almost ready to plunge into this, into nonsense here. But the real edge I'm going out on is, if we make the parallels between all the generation, this is how it lines up. We don't know any of these people here, but we know that Esau is 10th in the same contemporary 10th generation from Nimrod. If he has an awareness of him being other, and he has some awareness of time, and even forget that, okay? If he has some awareness of a legendary ancestor that is just one on a different line outside of his line, he's going to look to Nimrod. Nimrod is the hunter. It says here, Kush yalad Nimrod, hu hechel liyot gibor ba'aretz. He was a strong man. Hu haya gibor tzayid, strong hunter, lifnei Adonai, before God. Al ken yamer ki Nimrod gibor tzayid lifnei Adonai. And thus they said, as a kind of folk saying, like Nimrod, the hero hunter before God. Okay? So if you grow up hearing that everybody says, oh, a Nimrod, it's like, lahavdil. It's like, oh, he's a Gretzky. He's a Gretzky. Look at him. He's a Gretzky. Look at that. He's brilliant. He's an Einstein. He's an Einstein. Oh, my kid's an Einstein. Look, my kid can play the piano. He's a Mozart. This kid, he's a Glenn Gould. He's a this, he's a that. That's what you hear. We do that all the time with our children. Look at that brilliant child. He's an Einstein. Look at that way. And certainly in religious culture, look, the Vilna Gaon. This kid is so smart. He's the Vilna Gaon. He's the embodiment of that. And so in folklore, that's what you do. You have these kinds of statements all around you. And the problem is that you can actually believe that, right? If you grow up, certainly in Canada, hearing, you're a Gretzky, you're a Gretzky, you might in fact grow up to be a Gretzky. You might grow up to, you hear how wonderful and talented you are, you might in fact want to become that. So here's my theory, or the hypothesis. Esau already senses that he's other. He senses by looking at himself. He senses that he knows that he's other because of the way everybody relates to him. From the moment he is born, they have applied to him a name. They have given him a name based on how he looks. He has to confront that, and he has to reach back to a past that is differentiated from that which is around him. So he reaches into a different family line. He reaches into the family line of Cham as opposed to Shem. And he aspires to a different model, a different mythological archetypal model than the model that's in front of him. He is modeled in his family. He's got a father who is traumatized, old, etc. He's got a grandfather who's really old and has a special relationship with God. This child doesn't have that, but he has brawn, he has a body, he has hair, and he's got this predilection that is in a different way through a different ancestral line. Okay, and we're almost out of time. So I'm saying Esau links his identity to the most legendary figure in the arch rival lineage. The arch rival lineage to Shem is Cham. Cham is the cursed line, okay? And Shem is the blessed line. So Esau sees himself already as someone who is other and reaches outside of his own line to this legendary past, and then says 10th generation, so I am a hunter like Nimrod, okay? And I'm going to just conclude with this little postscript, okay? Which is, we know that this verse, when Esau was 40 years old, he took to wife Judith, daughter of Beri the Hittite, and Basmat, daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they were a source of bitterness to Isaac and Rebekah. So Esau marries at the age of 40. You have to ask yourself, why does Esau marry at 40? Because he knows that his father married at the age of 40. That's number one. Why does he marry Canaanites? He marries Canaanites because he aspires to be part of the land. He wants that. And he sees himself in that lineage. The Hittites are just descendants of Canaan begot Sidon, the firstborn, and Chet. So the Hittites are Canaanites, okay? So Esau marries a Canaanite, and he wants to throw his own lineage into that world. And he wants to dissociate from the Isaac world. So no wonder they are upset. We can make all sorts of, spin yarns about they're idolaters, they're horrible, they're this, they're that, everything, okay? But more than just the fact that they're disgusting, yicky Canaanites, which we all, it's that he aspires to be something other than what we are. And that's what makes them really, really better. Okay, so I've tried to illustrate here the backstory, or at least an imagined backstory of Esau. I know that there was some, Bob, you had your hand up, and Barbara also again. Go ahead, Bob.
Just a few quick comments. I would make the assumption, being a lover of Star Trek, that perhaps Abraham, Isaac, and the others were in spiritual telepathy with each other. So to actually communicate, they could have that possibility. But with all due respect, rather than thinking of Isaac as a nebbish, I'd like to think of him as a very noble person.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is that, first of all, he's a digger of wells, an opener of wells, foreseeing possibility. Yes. And I think Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said that his ability to accept Esau for who he was actually, if you will, equanimity in terms of acceptance for people of all different types.
Okay.
And so I take it in a different way in terms of that. I also think maybe in the Mormon faith that some people say that Esau actually killed Nimrod. And there's some articles online that I found along those lines. So interesting.
Nice. Okay, I'll have to take a look at those. Yes, right. I don't. So the marriage occurs, when he's 40, and the marriage occurs after the first episode, before the blessing episode. So there is I think I would agree with you. There Isaac has a certain benevolence towards Esau, perhaps because he senses his otherness, and also because of something unfulfilled in Isaac himself. Isaac enjoys vicariously the life of his son. When we look at these characters, often, the easy sermon to say is, sometimes parents live vicariously through their sons, and their children. They want to see their children succeed, so that we have natural joy when our children succeed. Of course, to live vicariously through our children, obviously, is something more. And Isaac does that also.
The other quick medical thing is ruddiness or redness could have been, for example, what's called plethora, which with polycythemia, elevated blood counts we see in babies. And there's fine hair called lanugo, which appear on babies, but that's different than I think what you're describing here.
This was a full head of hair and a full body of hair. Okay. All right. Is there any other question here? Barbara, I think you had your hand up, or is that from leftover? Steve, Barbara Parkoff, you're muted and you're off video. Okay.
Oh, I'm here. No questions.
No questions. Liliana, go ahead.
It's a little comment. It says Vaikre'u Shmo Esav. They called his name Esav, And then it says, Vaikra et shmo Yaakov.
Very good. So that's a very close reading. And in fact, so what it means is that it's Vaikra is Isaac. Isaac is the subject of the verb there. Isaac takes charge of the situation. And the reason why Isaac takes charge of the situation is because there's nothing complicated about the birth. Isaac emerges, he's smooth, he comes out fairly easily. He did stick his hand out and grabbed on his brother's ankle, but once his brother was out, he was born easily. Everybody fussed over Esau and said how unusual this is, Vaikru, and there was Jacob, Yaakov left, and obviously there must have been someone else there, but Vaikra, he named him. Yes, he named him alone. Good point. All right. Well, that as usual, we only got about 6 verses, and that just